celebrating Sir Walter Scott's minstrelsy in story and song. The first tune was The Duke of Buccleuch, and the second The Duke of Roxburgh. And now, taking us into the Borthwick reel, Laurie, who was born and brought up on the borders, is at home with those tunes as anyone. But if I tell you that I was brought up in Skye, I hope you don't think that that's only as far as beyond the border we're going to go. It doesn't rest on that. There was many more connections with Sir Walter than some might imagine. As you all know, he was born in Edinburgh, August the 15th, 1771, and his father was a solicitor and had every intention of bringing up his family in Edinburgh, but for a twist of fate, which at the time seemed very cruel. He was just a toddler when Walter was stricken with infantile paralysis, polio we call it now. And though his maternal grandfather, Dr. Rutherford, was a prestigious surgeon, and he was concerned for the boy, he could do nothing for him. So his advice was to send him down near Kelso with his Scots grandparents. They lived near Sandy now, and they'd have plenty of time for the boy. Not that they knew anything about medicine. They had a lot of old wives' tales. And so Walter was wrapped in a freshly flayed sheepskin and sewed into it, and they let him wriggle about on the floor. Some folk believed that that had magical healing powers. And meanwhile, Grandfather Scott would sit and he'd lay his watch on the floor and the chain, and he'd just out of reach of the wee hands. And as he got nearer, he'd pull the chain, encouraging him to follow and crawl after it. Now this might sound like a curious cure, but in terms of healing, it was actually more effective than the healing that I were to go through for the same thing. 3 years in a plaster, armpits to my toes, and then when I got cut out of it, I could hardly move anything. And he had better company with Aunt Janet as well than those hospital nurses I had. And whoever called at Sandy now, visiting the grandparents, they'd sit and yarn by the fireside. It was the perfect setting for the old ballads. Johnny got up on a May morning, called for water to wash his hands. Says, "Gie loose to me my twa grey dugs that are lying in iron bands." Johnny's mother, she heard o' this. Her hands for dool she rang, saying, "Johnny, for your venison, to the greenwood dinna gang." But Johnny has ta'en his good ben bow, his arrows one by one, and he's awa to the greenwood glen, to ding the dun deer doon. But Johnny's good ben bow is broke, his twa grey dugs are slain, and his body lies in Monymusk, his hunting days are done. From the ballads and stories, Walter sensed the importance of family to the borderer. Armstrongs, Elliots, Douglases, Coburns, Kerrs, Maxwells, and of course the Scots. And at home in Sandy now, he could look out and see Smailham Tower. What a setting to fire the imagination, or hear for the first time that what Scott O'Harden about that border reiver was among his father's folk. Every evening, when daylight faded and the lamp was lit, the family liked to listen to Aunt Janet. She would read accounts of border reiving and plunder, intermixed with Bible stories. By the time he was 4, Walter had a head full of those stories, and he'd also grown to be fairly healthy. He loved the outdoors and he was able to walk. Nevertheless, Aunt Janet Scott took him to the healing spa in Bath to see if that would cure his limp. Then they went to London, and whether that helped or not, he wasn't sure, but he did learn to ride after that. And all the stories that he heard on those long trips from Aunt Janet, she shared every single page with him. And as a result, Walter learned to read long before he went to school. He just loved books, and he recalled, 2 or 3 old books lay on the window seat, and they were explored for my amusement in tedious winter days. Ramsay's Tea Table Miscellany was my favourite. At the age of 7, Walter was brought back to Edinburgh, a head full of ballads and stories that ranged across centuries of Scottish history. The king sits in Dunfermline tune, drinking the blood-red wine.
Wait a minute. What king?
Oh, that was Alexander III. Now, he died in 1285. Oh, you should hear Aunt Janet on that. They should never have anything to do with that Sir Michael Scott. That man was a wizard. No wonder the boat went down. Do you know what he told us in Skye? My people. They wondered how you calculate the date of Easter. And he said that he would ride to Rome and he would ask the Pope's daughter the date of Easter. That was Michael Scott, my word. Young Walter knew his border history too. All about the family feuds and jealousies and rivalries. And these old ballads are just full of that. But it's not so much this that gives them their truth. At the age of 13, he laid hands on a copy of Bishop Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry, 1765. He was completely captivated and he said, I forgot the hour of dinner. I was sought for with anxiety and was still found entranced in my intellectual banquet. To read and to remember was in that instance the same thing, and henceforth I overwhelmed my schoolfellows, and all would hearken unto me with tragic recitations from the ballads of Bishop Percy. The first time, too, I could scrape a few shillings together, which were not uncommon occurrences for me, because my father paid me 3d a folio for printing out and copying out legal documents. To tell you the truth, I detested that drudgery, but I bought unto myself a copy of these beloved volumes, and nor do I believe I've ever read a book half so frequently or with half the enthusiasm. Thankfully, Walter didn't happen to come across the most famous critic of the day, Dr. Johnson. He had a low opinion of folk who sang them, and never mind these folk who listened. What are you all doing here? But therein lies the difference between the pedant and the artist. From boyhood, Walter had a truly bardic memory, with the ability to recite thousands of lines without any reference to print. And at the age of 14, he was ready to attend Edinburgh University, where he studied Latin, Greek, and logic. His studies were interrupted by illness a year later, but a couple of months in Kelso and with his aunts, that soon had him back in fine fettle, and back to Edinburgh he went. That same year, 1786, saw the publication of Burns's Kilmarnock edition of poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialect. And the following year, when the ploughman poet returned to Edinburgh, 16-year-old Walter Scott was among the folk who spent a memorable evening with him. When he was well into old age, he was able to look back on that treasured memory. I never saw such another eye in a human being, though I have seen the most distinguished men of my time. His conversation expressed perfect self-confidence, but without the least intrusive forwardness. Between 1787 and 1792, Burns devoted most of his time to collecting and editing songs for two important collections, Johnson's Musical Museum and Thomson's Selected Scottish Airs.
And 1792 was the same year that Scott began collecting for his minstrelsy.
He already knew so many of them off by heart. They would, as he said himself, take several days in the recitation. And this one, for example, was one that had never been in print. It's not exactly the one he collected, but it's one that was and still is in oral tradition. There was a lady in the north, you'd scarcely find her marrow. She was courted by 9 noble men in the dowie dens o' Yarrow. Oh, these 9 noble men sat drinking wine, drinking for their sorrow, that the fairest maid you ever saw was in the dowie dens o' Yarrow. Now her father had a young ploughboy, and him she loved most dearly, so she dressed him up as a nobleman, and she sent him off to Yarrow. Well, did you come here to play cards or dice? Did you come here for sorrow? Or did you come here to slay us all in the dowie dens o' Yarrow? Well, I neither came here to play cards or dice, nor did I come here for sorrow, but one by one, as long as ye stand, I will fecht ye all in Yarrow. Oh, it's 3 slew and 3 he drew, and 3 deadly wounded. Then her false brother John came running in, and he pierced him through the middle. Oh, go home, you false young man. Go tell your sister Sorrow that her true lover John lies dead and gone in the dowie dens o' Yarrow. Oh, mother dear, I have dreamed a dream. I fear it may prove sorrow, that my true lover John lies dead and gone in the dowie dens o' Yarrow. Oh, daughter dear, I hae read your dream, and yes, it does prove sorrow, for your true lover John lies dead and gone in the dowie dens o' Yarrow. Oh, here be no 3/4 land, the colour it being yellow, she wrapped it round her middle sae small, and she carried him hame to Yarrow. Oh, mother dear, come and make my bed, oh, make it long and narrow, for my true lover John died for me today. I will die for him tomorrow.
But not all ballads were sung as concert pieces, were they?
No, folk would get into long discussions about their meanings and their context. Who was this lady, or who was that ploughboy? And Scott did collect a number of versions of this, and he said it was very difficult to select the one he finally published. The hero, he noted, was probably John Scott, who was murdered by the brother of his wife or his betrothed.
But why would one version differ from another? Especially when the basic storylines are the same.
Does it really matter? The facts remain. Blood was shed. The outcome is the same. And it's not so much the historical truth that gives these ballads their enduring quality. It's more the emotional truth. These were the sorts of issues that must have occurred to him when he was collecting for his minstrelsy. He'd already explored on horseback locations the ballads were heard, and so over the next 7 years, along with chosen companions, he made special expeditions wherever the ballad might take him. There was John Leyden, a shepherd's son from Roxburgh Hills, a scholar and a poet, and he refused to speak the genteel English. And like Walter, he had several languages. And there was Dr. Eliot, who gave him some ballads written out already. There was Willie Laidlaw, who farmed at Blackhouse on the Douglas Water. He was also very keen on poetry and ballads. And then Willie introduced him to James Hogg on the Ettrick. He was a shepherd, and at one time he'd worked for Willie's father. And his mother, Margaret Laidlaw, was a great ballad singer and reciter, though she would put Walter in his place when he told her what he was going to do.
There was never ane of my songs prented till you prented them yourself, and you've spoilt them all together. They were made for singing, no for speaking, and no for reading, but you've breaking the chair noo, and they'll never be sung mair.
But she was wrong. The songs continued to be sung and passed on and discussed. Then, just as Burns had done, Walter also tried his hand at writing ballads. He got the idea for his first composition when he heard a Gaelic legend in Highland Perthshire, and he called the ballad Glenfinlas, or Lord Ronald's Coronach. Now, Glenfinlas, you might know, is a tract of forest not far from Callander, Menteith. You can see Benledi and Benmore and Benvorlich. It was a former royal forest, as well as the adjacent district of Balwhidder. It was inhabited chiefly by MacGregors. And briefly, this is the story. Two Highland hunters were passing a night in solitary bothy, making merry over their venison and a wee glass of whisky. And one of them expressed a wish that if only they had some pretty girls to complete the party, what a night they'd have. But the words were scarcely uttered when these two beautiful women, dressed in green, appeared, singing and dancing. And one of the young men, Ronald, he was seduced and persuaded to leave the bothy. The other one, Moy, he was rather frightened, and he continued to play on his Jew's harp what he called some strain consecrated to the Virgin Mary. Daylight came, and Moy searched in the woods, and he found the remains of his friend, torn to pieces. That place to this day is called the Glen of the Green Women. Oh, hoinery, the pride of Albin's line is o'er, and fond Glenartney's stately tree we ne'er shall see Lord Ronald more. He composed 67 four-line verses to tell that story, so I thought maybe one might suffice for tonight. So far, I've only ever met one person who knew the whole lot and who learned it in youth and who could recite it, he could sing it as well, and that was Hamish Henderson. And he'd learned it as a boy near Blairgowrie, and he recited it to me in the meadows over 60 years later. Now, between you and me, we were actually on our way to a faculty meeting. And we were talking about Scott. We'd no idea what the faculty were going to talk about, but anyway, I stopped and I listened to Scotland's greatest 20th century song collector sing the whole lot. Of course we missed the meeting, wasn't I glad? And he told me about his enormous fondness for Scott. Now, when both Robert Burns and Hamish Henderson reputedly enjoyed convivial company and maybe an occasional wee glass of whisky, it occurs to me, reading John Leyden's account of the ballad collecting with Walter Scott, he could have given either one of these two a run for their money, believe me. Old Jonathan Graham, a man upwards of 80. I'll never forget his appearance. Tall and so thin as to be more like a walking skeleton than a human being. Indeed, you wouldn't have said till I looked at him that he was a living creature, till he began to recite. And then he got fired up and prodigiously animated. He spoke, or he rather scrocht, in a loud stentorian voice which formed the oddest contrast imaginable with his worn and emaciated figure. He could eat little or none, poor creature, but he drank well, and Dr. Elliot and Sir Walter filled him exceedingly full of brandy. Oh, he was ill. Faith, I thought he would die in our hands ends, for he clean fainted a while. But we carried him out in the fresh air and we threw water into his old wizened face, and we rubbed at him and we rocked on him till he came about again. And no sooner was he better than he set about roaring some outlandish lilt again. Oh, he made the awfullest, unctuous howling sound I ever heard. Leyden also recalled that on these tours, Scott didn't take any notes. He said, we had neither pens nor ink nor paper, but we had knives, and they served the turn just as well. And Walter made a variety of notches, and they were the only memoranda I ever saw him pay. And when he'd notched them all, he slipped them into his pocket. Oh, heeds and throws. Oh, when I asked him what the marked sticks were for, he said, this is my logbook, Bob. I was frequently with him at his father's house in Edinburgh when he was preparing for the Minstrelsy, and he went along and he very often had recourse to these notched sticks. He had them hanging in their order above him by a string from the ceiling of his room.
And what a testament to his memory, his song collecting, and his sheer hard work. He published 2 volumes in 2 years. The first 2 in Kelso in 1802, and the next 2 in Edinburgh, 1803.
Yes, he did. And he worked as well. Scott had this to say in his introduction, modest as he was. I may contribute something to the history of my native country, the peculiar features of whose manners and character are daily melting and dissolving into those of our sister and ally. And trivial as may appear such an offering to the mains of a kingdom, once proud and independent, I hang it upon her altar with a mixture of feelings which I shall not attempt to describe. More than a quarter of the 112 songs or versions in the Minstrelsy had never been published. That's the thing that bothered Mrs. Laidlaw, but included were some that are still very much part of oral tradition. Clark Saunders, the Douglas Tragedy, Johnny O'Bradysley, Proud Lady Margaret, The Cruel Sister, The Wife of Usher's Well, and perhaps the widest known of all, the Queen's Mary's. Often known as Mary Hamilton, it was first printed in the Minstrelsy. And true to form, Scott gives us an intriguing discussion as the possible historical settings, its social context, and so on. Now, most of us heard this song in school. Nobody told me a thing about it. Did they tell you? So I wasn't much keen on it. Not until I heard this. Here are the possibilities he offers. He quotes Knox's History of the Reformation. A French woman who served the Queen and played whore with the Queen's apothecary and bore his child, who was then murdered, found out, then hanged. Then he made the suggestion the apothecary was actually Lord Darnley. Or there's a parallel account from the court of Tsar Peter the Great, who had a maid of honour, Mary Hambleton, and she produced 3 children, all killed at birth, and she was hanged. But the explanation I like the very best, offered by Scott, why all the versions aren't the same and all the Marys aren't the same, is this. The young Queen Mary embarked at Dumbarton for France, and with her went 4 virgins, all by the name of Mary. There was Livingston, Fleming, Seaton and Beaton. And the Queen's Marys are mentioned again and again. But later we find that Mary Livingston and Mary, it's Fleming, and then there's Mary Hamilton and Mary Carmichael. They appear. But it surely stands to reason if this corps continues to consist of young virgins, as when originally raised, you could hardly have subsisted without occasional recruits. Scott acknowledges Mr. Kirkpatrick Sharp of Hodham as the principal source for the version that finally appeared in print. Mary Hamilton's to the Kirkgane were ribbons in her hair. The king thought mair o' Mary Hamilton than ony that was there. Mary Hamilton's to the Kirkgane were ribbons on her breast. The king thought mair o' Mary Hamilton than he listened to the priest. Mary Hamilton to the Kirkgane with gloves upon her hand. The king thought mair o' Mary Hamilton than the queen and all her lands. The king is to the abbey gane, to pull the abbey tree, to scale the babe fae Mary's heart. I think that wouldna be. Oh, she had rowed it in her apron and set it on the sea. Gae sink or swim, ye bonny babe, you'll get nae mair o' me. Word is to the kitchen gane and word is to the hall that Mary Hamilton brocht to bed and the bonniest bairns ta'en a wall. Scarcely had she laid down again, and scarcely fawn asleep, when up then started our good queen, and came to her bed feet, saying, Mary Hamilton, where's the babe? For I'm sure I heard it greet. Oh no, my noble queen, think no such thing could be. 'Twas but a stitch into my side, and sair it troubled me. Get up, Mary Hamilton, get up and follow me. For I'm going to Edinburgh toon, a rich wedding for to see. Oh, slowly she raised up, and slowly she rade on. And slowly she rade on her way, wi' mony a weary groan. The queen was clad in scarlet, and her merry maids all in green. And every toon that they came to, they took Mary for the queen. But little wist Mary Hamilton, when she rade upon the broom, that she was going to Edinburgh toon, and to be pit doon. When she came to the Netherbow port, she laughed loud laughters 3. But when she came to the gallows foot, the salt tears blended her ee. Oh, often he I dressed my queen and put gowd in her hair, but I've gotten for my reward to it, oh, the cruel death I to thee. Oh, little did my mother ken the day she cradled me, the land I was to travel in, or the day I was to thee. Yes, three the queen had 4 Marys, the next she'll hae but 3. There was Mary Seaton and Mary Beaton and Mary Carmichael and me.
Oh, what a sad story. Can we not sing one with a happy ending? You know, one where the lady gets her man.
Well, what about one of our very favourites? When she does get the man, there's not many of them. Jock o' Hazeldean. And Walter composed the one that we know, based on a traditional border ballad that he heard, John o' Hazel Green. Now, I don't know of anybody in the 20th or the 21st century that I heard sing it in Scotland, but interestingly, I did hear it in Newfoundland and in North Carolina. And it was probably sung by immigrants who went there in the late 1700s. Actually, round about the time Walter was born, so before Jock o' Hazeldean existed. But it's a favourite, so please join in. Why weep ye by the tide, lady? Why weep ye by the tide? I'll wed ye to my younger son, and ye shall be his bride, and ye shall be his bride, lady. See, comely to be seen, but I shall let the tears doon fall for Jock o' Hazeldean. No, let this waeful grief be done, and dry your cheeks sae pale. Young Frank is chief o' Wellington, and Lord o' Langlydale. His step is first in peaceful hall, his sword in battle keep. But I shall let the tears doon fall for Jock o' Hazeldean. A crown o' gold ye shall na lack, nor braid to bind your hair, nor mettled hound, nor managed hawk, nor paltry fresh and fair. But ye, the foremost o' them all, should ride the forest queen. But I shall let the tears doon fall for Jock o' Hazeldean. The kirk was decked at morning tide, the tapers glimmered fair. The priest and bridegroom wait the bride, and dame and knight were there. They saw them bathe by field and hall. The lady was na seen, she's o'er the border and now with Jock o' Hazeldene. And when the family moved to Abbotsford, Walter liked nothing better than to invite friends for dinner, and the hours would fly past, especially when we got the on to discussing songs or singing. And Walter enjoyed a sense of mischief from time to time, and he would cleverly catch out his guests, because inevitably somebody would begin a discussion about literature, and somebody was bound to ask him,
Tell me, Watty, what makes a good rhyme?
"My name is Lister. I lay with your sister."
Well, that's not true.
Oh, well, how about, "My name is Lister. I lay with your wife."
Well, that doesn't even rhyme.
No, but it's true. In 1814, at the invitation of the Duke of Buccleuch, Sir Walter and his wife and daughter visited the Hebrides and the Northern Isles. And while on the Isle of Skye, he and his family were guests of the MacLeods of Dunvegan. Of course, they stayed in the castle, and they sat at the banqueting table in the hall, and they heard the very last of the bards and the minstrels, once part of everyday life, but very fast fading. And he listened to the last of those hereditary pipers, Ildu Macrimon. He was an old man then, nearly 90. He died in 1822. And his family had founded at Borrerigg in Skye the first school of music in Britain. Walter and his family listened to the songs and the legends and translations of them, and he was deeply moved by the story of Dolban Macrimon. He heard the pibroch, and he heard a song. And what happened was, according to tradition, Dolban Macrimon had a premonition of his own death. In 1746, he saw that he had not long to live. And he actually set out, and in February, just a month before Culloden, he was killed at the rout of Moy. He was shot. The story so moved Sir Walter that he composed his own version of Macrimon's Lament, which has travelled all around the world. Hachi, hachi, Chachil Makriman and Koknoshi Hachil Etele Leye Gichnoni Hachil Makriman Hachil Ekbrach Gelana Krinje When they got back home to Abbotsford, however, it wasn't this song or even any of his own compositions that he was very keen to hear his daughter sing, but a simple Gaelic song taught to her by one of the MacLeods of Dunvegan. And in a letter to Mrs. MacLeod of MacLeod, Sir Walter wrote, "My eldest girl, Sophie, sings Catchil Gula. Please excuse my Saxon spelling. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. Shemi talan korsje, Janik mira de sukret. Shemi talan korsje, tantorik in pak. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. Shemi talan fleska, gaver falla berenjeske. Mi fovreslich me hesesen kja. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. Ohoro iri Catchil Gula. He'd been much taken with MacLeod's piper too, the one who played at dinner every night. So he engaged a skyman by the name of Bruce, a pupil of Maccrimmon, to be his wood forester and occasionally his piper. And he hoped that life in the lowlands wouldn't spoil his piping hands. But Sir Walter was in his element. Of course, he had a great ambition to plant a lot of trees, and he had a good pair of hands to help him. But they could discuss poetry and songs and tradition and any aspect of culture you could think of.
I really wish I could have been there. I do love a good pipe tune.
But if there's one song that I'd like to ask him about, it would be this one. I find this song more difficult to get my tongue around the words than any tricky Gaelic mouth music. And would you believe it's Bonnie Dundee? I trip over it nearly every time, so this is where you come in to sing it with us. And it's an 18-point type, so don't say you forgot your specs. It was first published in the Minstrelsy, and like all his songs and stories, it's been around. So here we are, September the 4th, 2014, our version in the new club. Deep breath, everybody. No, I bet there's experts among us. So. Now, just I better tell you in advance, if you don't do it right the first one, Laurie will make us do it twice. Well, it's been beyond the borders without a shadow of a doubt. And we'd like to thank you for inviting us. And we'll shortly take our leave, and we'll all linger around and talk about those ballads, and you get a chance to sing your very own, I think, and maybe a glass with it. But as we do this, we're going to weave in a couple of lines that were claimed by Walter Scott and Lady Nairn, I think Hogg as well. We find them in some of Walter Scott's ballads, but he doesn't claim them for himself. They're traditional. It's that good night and joy be with you all. And this is one you may or may not have heard, and Laurie has brought it along, and you're going to get your very own copy. I believe you're going to teach us the chorus.
Oh yes, I love a good chorus. So your words for the chorus are: happy we've been all together, canty we've been yen and all. Time will see us all mair blither, ere we rise to gang a ball. Either in the ankle blazon, lazy, happy, and safe free, while the northern wind blows reason. Friendship warms both you and me. Happy we've been all together, until we've been in and out. Time will see us all mair blither, ere we rise to gang the wood. See the miser out his treasure, glutton we greedy, walk and fill his woes with pleasure, as a as here we see.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of a perfect day. It has been a lovely day, by the way, a lovely autumn day. But paradoxically, it's a touch of spring, metaphorically also, because so many students are starting at the university, so many school children are going willingly or unwillingly back to school. And here we have the Minstrelsy of the Scottish border. It's a beginning, it's a big beginning. It's where Scott, as we've heard so eloquently from Elizabeth and with lovely music from Laurie, it's his whole psyche was moved by the experiences he had as a child, the legends, the ballads of that lovely part of the world in which he lived, and of which Laurie, in fact, lives. But Skye has not been left out. There are other parts of Scotland, and I would like to think that here we have two ladies who are steeped in folklore and our own traditions in different parts of Scotland in the same way as Scott. And so really we've been exceptionally privileged to have people who have the feeling of the minstrelsy of the Scottish borders. And I think it's sort of lifted, certainly me, well, I'm not a good singer, it's probably quite obvious, but anyway, I feel it's a way to start the season. We start the season really with a song in our heart, if I may use the American refrain, but I think we shall leave this place almost singing, thanks to a wonderful pair of exponents of Scott. So before I ask you to show your appreciation, I've been asked on behalf of the club to present two little tangible gifts of our appreciation. One is a book called Talking About Scott, if I may. And the other, I'm not quite sure, I don't think it's underwear, but I was given I'm sure it's a kerchief or something like that. I'm not really into haberdashery, but there we are. And for you, actually. Thank you very much. Thank you.